Hi, everyone. This is a Forever Forward podcast. Unfortunately, Umesh can't be here today, so I have been drafted as host. I have Anna Foden, who is Head of Sustainability at ISG, and Katie Whipp, who is Head of Partnerships and Alliances at Resustain. Um, Rather than sort of do a very bad job of trying to introduce you both, um, how about we start by you just telling me a little about who you are, what you do, why it matters to whom, and something a little about your journey, about how you have got to where you are. And I'm going to be really simple about this and start with Anna because A becomes before K in the alphabet.
Sure. Thanks, Justin. Thanks for having me, by the way. So, like you said, my name's Anna. I'm head of sustainability at ISG. We're a large multinational construction company. So, I head up three different business units: high street retail, commercial fit out, and data centers. So, I span quite a range of construction typologies, if we're talking about environmental sustainability. I started my career as an architecture student, actually. And realized that that's not what I wanted to do. So I quickly jumped to the dark side of construction, and have been working in either construction or consultancy ever since. I moved to the UK 13 years ago, and I've been working out of London ever since. So I've got, I think, an interesting perspective starting my career in the US and then coming to Europe, and working here. Um, and, I think environmental issues and sustainability has always been something I've been really passionate about ever since architecture school. And I was lucky enough as a young graduate in a very large construction company that got voluntold to do sustainability for them when I was very young and out of architecture school. And I've been doing it ever since. And I think right now, more than ever, it's such a vital um, it's such a vital department in a construction company, and what I'm realizing that it's not just focused on our department. Everyone in our company has gotten on board at ISG from the top down at the board level, which is, we almost compare ourselves to health and safety. We want to be integrated into the ethos of everything that everyone's doing at our company. And I think now more than ever, people at my company and in the built environment in general, we're all getting on board and trying to reduce our carbon emissions.
Great. And Katie?
Yeah, thank you. So Katie, and thanks also for inviting me to be a part of the conversation today. And I must say, I'm enjoying that this is across so many different time zones. So I'm enjoying this. As Justin said, I lead on partnerships at Resustain, which is a clean tech, prop tech startup, which is a nice mouthful in the commercial real estate space. So there's a lot of us that do what we do, but we definitely believe that we do it a little differently. So via our digital twin technology, we look to remotely improve the energy efficiency of assets. And that actually can sit anywhere between a reduction of 22 to 61% annually. So we're particularly proud of that, and we're doing that a little bit differently. And for us, that sits alongside enabling long-term decarbonisation, planning and implementation. And for us, really, this is all sort of out of a focus and a bit of a passion project for everyone in the business around actually transitioning the 80% of building stock that will still be here in 2050, and actually taking action on that. So I think all of us who are in the business have actually been fortunate enough to work on technology platforms previously in the commercial real estate space in one way or another, whether that be asset and property management. And actually we want to progress beyond actionable insights and actually make the impact piece and take the action. Alongside my role at Trust Tech, alongside my role at Resustain, I'm also a non-exec at Trust Tech, which again leans into my passion for tech and sustainability together. So that's a leading property tech consultancy within the commercial real estate space, and they are engaging across owner, operator, and occupier. And I know the stakeholder mix is something we'll talk about later, to ensure that the right technology decisions are being made at the right time in order to achieve optimal building performance and outcomes. And these sort of themes are things that are really important to me and something that I'm really passionate about. And naturally, as I've spoken to both of you before, certainly in the context of sustainability and what we should be doing. I think to your query on net zero, why does it matter and for whom? I think for me, net zero is incredibly exciting. And I jumped into the field with both feet 5 years ago, because for me, it's the biggest risk and the biggest opportunity for the sector. I think there's been incredible progress in the last 5 years. We're definitely making steps to transition to net zero. But I think if we're really honest about it, there are some massive aspects to navigate if we are to deliver as a sector by 2050 and play our part in not warming the world above 1.5 degrees, which I think we're all hugely concerned about. I think also alongside this, net zero provides an incredible growth opportunity for those who look to early adopt, but equally those who are looking to lead the transition. And I think we're seeing incredible cases of that within the market, in the knowledge that also we've got the tool and technology to get to net zero. We're simply just not moving fast enough. So I think this sort of agitation piece is really important. And last year we saw the UK GBC come forward and say that the UK needs to decarbonise twice as fast over the next couple of years if it's to keep on track with net zero by 2050. So that's not even looking to overcommit, which I think we're seeing a lot of the targets out there within companies. So I think for me, super exciting, really, really looking forward to discussion today. And that's a bit of the context, I guess, from where I'm coming in from.
I think I better close down some windows because I'm getting multiple messages simultaneously at the moment from both WhatsApp and LinkedIn. But look, huge thanks to you both for kind of giving me some background and context and the listeners. I think when we kind of caught up on the pre-call and tried to work out how we might navigate this conversation, given there's so many different strands and elements to it, but some kind of very simple way of going from like, where are we at, where do you think we need to be, and how do you think we should get there? So maybe we could just start with some of the challenges that you're both seeing at the moment, and maybe start with Katie this time, because K comes after A, and and then, you know, to try and get a sense of, I mean, there may be other ways to look at where we're at beyond just challenges, and maybe perhaps get a kind of, because I think we're kind of really focusing a bit more on the digital rather than the physical here, is try and look at it from that point of view. Is there anything, you know, that jumps out of you, or like this is kind of what we really need to sort of confront?
Yeah, I think to caveat, rather than always looking at it in the negative, I think we're also on a tipping point as we come into 2024. I think, you know, I can't necessarily put loads of stats around it, but I think there's a palpable difference in terms of how we've started the year and where the industry feels it's going and the pace of change that I think everyone wants to look to adopt. I think the challenge that we still have is that the concept of net zero is both simple but also incredibly complex. There's no universally accepted definition in terms of quantifying what is a net zero standard building. And I think with that sort of ties in actually to the fact that there's no standard definition for a smart building, and these two sort of come together. But I think where the difference is actually, as we go into the spring of this year, we're all really excited in the UK because we're hopefully going to see a standard in terms of a single source of methodology around how to define and quantify a net zero carbon building. So I think, to my point around it being a tipping point, there is momentum, there is change, and there is a want to set the standard in order to enable action. I think in terms of where we are, and data is something we talked about on the pre-call. We all talk about it a lot, but equally it's because we haven't got our hands around it fully yet. So it's our golden thread to net zero. It's our golden thread in terms of how we manage ultimate performance in buildings. And it's still really difficult to get access to the data that we need to across the variety of stakeholders that are in play in terms of this journey. And it's particularly challenging on long income FRI leases, which is probably a whole separate podcast. But I think it's important to look at that because actually, if we're looking to net zero, to calculate accurate carbon baselines, set realistic targets that are specific to the buildings that we're working with, we really do need that sort of granularity in data. But equally, we also need to step away of not looking for perfect, because that's sort of created the inertia that I think we've been in for a couple of years. Longer, actually, I'm being kind. We need to work with what we've got and build on that. So take the action, progress, and see where we get to. I think sort of looking at the tech side, which is sort of naturally where I sit, for me, there are an incredible amount of solutions in the space to help the industry transition to net zero. Where we can be better as a technology sector is looking at our interoperability and being cognizant of the fact that we need to work together as well to help that journey and not operate in our sort of technology silos, which can happen. But I think the challenge we have is that all too often net zero technologies, enablers of this broader ESG sort of transition, are onboarded on single buildings on a pilot. So it's a project by project basis. And actually, that's again a hindrance in terms of not being able to see the full decarbonisation journey for your portfolio, not being able to identify the broader opportunities and actually even the investment needed to get where you need to. So, from a technology perspective, we want to be adopted, we want to help, but equally there's a broader piece around that in terms of making that a reality.
Before bringing Anna in, you mentioned, but there may be some kind of agreement happening. I mean, is that a group, a body, or a new, because there's always a joke, isn't it? Oh my God, there are 14 different standards. Let's try and consolidate them. Now we have 50. So when you say there's a new one coming, there seems to be some coalescence around some agreement. Can you just sort of give a kind of indication of what that looks like? Who, where, when, what?
So it's coming from the UK GBC. So it's building on a huge amount of work that's been taking place in preceding years. And I'm sure Anna is super up to speed on this more than me, but it's looking at really the fruits and the efforts of the industry coming together to look at a net zero carbon standard for a building and definitions and what the quantifiable factors are within that. Now that plays into data and all the other elements that play into there to look for that standard. So that's sort of what that piece is. It comes in spring. I don't know any more than that. So it's imminent, but I think it's incredibly exciting. And I think to your point on regulation, right, I wish there was just 12 in ESG. I think there's over 640 regulation certifications globally. So it's an incredible number. And I think where we need to get to as well on the broader reg piece is actually finding a balance between disclosure and data demands not being a drain and actually enabling investors to start investing and thinking differently at scale, allow managers and operators to put new processes in place to use the real estate and operate it in a different way, and equally allow occupiers to change their behaviours and focus on that. So, I think I heard someone recently say that the ESG landscape is like an alphabet soup, which took me back to childhood, which I found really, really funny. But it's fair, right? But we are seeing integration of standards into, the ISSB, for example, where we're seeing key standards integrate into that. So I think you'll see more streamlining across the year and hopefully the years to come, because there's a lot of them. But obviously, as with everything in sort of real estate, it's going to take time.
That's fascinating. Anna, from your perspective.
Right. The question was where we are and where we need to get to?
At the moment, where are we at? It will probably come to where we should be.
Oh, right. Where are we at? Right. So so I think I've got a bit of a different perspective because I'm working on the delivery side of delivering some of these buildings. And I think, I think Justin, I've said this a few times. A really simple thing about where we're at right now, I think something that we could do a lot better, everyone, is to get a better handle around how people are using buildings, which has obviously drastically changed since COVID and post COVID, and getting simple data around how your building's used, I think, is a really key bit of data to have so that clients can understand what they want out of their buildings going forward. And I think, that, like I said, that has changed drastically over the past few years. Um, I think if you don't know how your building's used and you don't know how your space is used, you're not going to know how to effectively reduce your carbon emissions. Um, and we are seeing more and more clients demanding operational energy models very early on, which is fantastic. So we are seeing it come through in the tenders we're working on. There is a focus on operational energy use, whether they want to use the neighbors certification systems or not. Some people are simply using the TM54 modeling approach, which is fantastic, but I think we are seeing that a lot more. I think there is still a big question mark around what data do I need and how much do I need and how do I use it? Katie, I know we kind of talked about this during
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
pre-podcast catch up. I think there is a fear around data right now. And so people are running to get as much as they can. But on the flip side, sometimes so much data is being captured that they don't know what to do with it. And ideally, what you want to do with the data is use it to make your building perform better or to implement some sort of behavioral change in the people using the building. So I think that is the next, if when we move on to the what comes next, I think that that's on the horizon. But I think there is potentially an issue of getting too much data and not knowing what to do with it. So I think simply as a client, when you're setting the brief, getting a really great understanding on how you want your space to be used. And that's as simple as, when do the lights need to be turned out at the end of the day? We're still not seeing uh, we're still not seeing a grasp simply around the office hours, the regular office hours of some of the spaces that we're building, which fair enough. Some industries, people are working all night, you have lawyers working to the wee hours of the morning so that, maybe a law firm might need their lights on all night. That's questionable sometimes. But yeah, I stand firm on, if we simply just got a better handle on how people are using the spaces, considering flexible working now, I think that would really help with the data set that you want to capture, and help you get a bit of a handle around your carbon emissions.
Well, it's interesting because when you speak to people about drivers of smart, then
Hmm.
historically energy management has been kind of where it really evolved from, the whole BMS and controls. And here we are, in some of those books back when it used to be called intelligent buildings, and back in the 90s, and now we're kind of, whatever it is, my maths isn't so good, but 30 years down the line, and and we're still on this area. I guess interestingly, and maybe when we talk about where we need to get to, or then we can talk about how we do that, but and Katie touched upon it just a moment ago by saying, so 80% of buildings which are in use today are still going to be in use in 2030. I mean, I always make this joke with Umesh, who sadly can't be here, but every single platform deck I've ever seen starts with a stat: 40% of all emissions come, and then the second slide goes, and 80%. So buildings are still in use, in use today, will still be in use in 2050 or for 30, 40, whatever. So the I guess where I'm really going to with all of that is saying, like, retrofitting is obviously going to be a really seemingly an important part of what we might want to do. I mean, not necessarily just to dwell on that alone, but in terms of, where you see things heading or where you think they should be heading. Anna, can we start with you this time, based on sort of your perspective from construction company, fit out company?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I guess I'll just continue on from where I just left off. I think there. Ooh, do I still have you?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think once you know what kind of data you want to be gathering, I think there is a really great exercise around using that data to help inform your design, and that's something that I think is definitely the next step. Getting a handle on how your current space is used, so that it can really help inform design decisions going forward. And I think you know we these digital twin tools are going to help us. Katie's working on them now. Model different scenarios so that clients can understand what types of design decisions actually mean for their building. So I think using the data as a tool to help inform design decisions is definitely the next step. um, I mentioned I work in data centers as well, and data centers are quite carbon intensive. So making sure that we're only uh, building the data centers that we need, and people being smart about their data and getting the data that they want, that's going to actually inform their operational function more efficiently, I think is definitely the next step. And then with that, working in on the construction side, I think we're going to see a lot more of the ISGs of the world, like my company, staying on board with some of these buildings a bit more closely um, after practical
Through,
completion.
through into operations, basically.
Yeah, I'm not saying we're going to be operating buildings. That's not, at least not at ISG. That's not something we're going to get. That's not what we're in the business of. But I think we are going to have a bit of a stake in the game about how buildings are performing, which means we will always do a commissioning process. But I think what the focus on operational energy, especially around some of the certifications now, neighbors in particular, is that fine tuning of the building, almost like a soft landings approach. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the government soft landings framework, but making sure that we're there to help fine tune the building. Um, we're not robots. Things sometimes get installed improperly, or settings are not put in place the right way, or a valve is open when it should be closed. These are obviously just very generic examples, but being there to support the facilities management team to make sure the building is performing as designed, I think is going to be a crucial piece of the puzzle. We all know about the performance gap with Part L models and kind of setting in stone and stopping, but this the model as it kind of is only the first piece of the puzzle. It's getting that operational data and actually making sure it's performing properly, and having us as the contractor and other members of the supply chain stay on board with that building a little bit as it goes into operation to make sure it's actually functioning properly is going to be crucial. And that might mean, fixing things that were perhaps installed incorrectly, but it also means, um, you know, creating spaces that are slightly flexible. Usage patterns might change, or maybe the usage pattern was a bit wrong during the model, and some of the set points need to be changed. So being able to adapt to those scenarios, I think, is going to be really important.
Great, thank you. And Katie, from maybe
Yeah,
the
I think
perspective.
yeah. Yeah, I think it's really important also to like build on what Anna has said as well. I think, the data point, as you all know, Justin, because we've talked a lot together, but super passionate about that, because a lot of the time we're collecting data and not knowing why on earth we're collecting it, or we're collecting what's easy as opposed to what's relevant and what will help us understand, to Anna's point, how the building's being used, what are the conditions in and around the building, what's changing in the local environment. And I think these are things where we need to get much better in terms of identifying what the objectives are for the data collection, what do we want it to achieve, and also making sure that that collection supports us over time. It isn't sort of a quick win for a report this quarter. It's something that you can iterate and monitor as we move forward. So I think it's important to take the time to think about that. And I think often we don't. There's sort of like, the more data you have, the more on track you are for net zero. And actually, most of the time, the more confused you are, and actually you've got a broader data set, it's impossible to understand. It's coming from loads of different locations in completely different formats, and actually you're spending a lot of time trying to decode your data in order to understand what on earth you should do with it and what it means. But I think drawing on Anna's point as well around the retrofit and the commissioning, I think for me it's really exciting to hear that, you know, your company will stay on and support the commissioning of that building post completion. I think for us in what we do from an energy optimization perspective, you know, the building can often fall out of its sort of designed format within 6 months of completion. And I think it's really important that we close out the gap there and that we upskill everybody within the building and take the learnings from that and equally take the learnings back for future retrofits. And I think this is a really powerful opportunity, and it's really great to hear that being taken on board. And I think it also ties into the fact that ESG is part of every decision. It's also part of all of our roles now, I think, historically. And one of my biggest frustrations is it was like a very niche subject, and ESG is the problem of the ESG team. It's not. It's for all of us to get our arms around and do something about. And I think with that in mind, I think a really helpful framework that supports the industry thinking about this and almost having a systematic and scalable way to look at this, particularly in the context of retrofits, is actually the Better Building Partnerships Managing for Performance framework. It's really, really helpful, and actually it makes what is actually quite complicated very simple in order to process and cycle through in a consistent manner. You start, as Anna has said, you know, in terms of really getting under the hood of your building, understanding what's going on, how it's performing, and, you know, extracting the data that's valuable, but equally understanding how that building's performing versus benchmarks, but also how it was intended to perform by the developers. And I think that's a really important piece. All too often we go in and we understand the building, we want to make changes ASAP. Actually, and at Resustain, we take the time to understand what's actually going on and what are the deeper problems before we then look to go in and start optimizing the building. So I think that's a really important first step. I think then scaling on the back of that in terms of looking at how you can improve the operational management performance of your building from an energy performance perspective. I think, as you've said, Justin, we were talking about it 24 years ago. We're still talking about it now because we're not doing enough in the space. There's still a huge amount of quick wins to take from this. And equally, optimization is a continual iterative process. It will never be done. We need to keep adapting and understanding the building and responding to how it's being used and changed. And we've seen a huge amount of change on that, as Anna said, post-pandemic. And then I think, you know, in the context of retrofit, going that little bit further and figuring out where we can add more value, it's going into looking at the deeper opportunities, you know, engaging more technology, looking at specific fabrics of buildings. There's a huge amount here which others are more specialised on, but that is going into the things that will really shift the dial and are the bigger ticket investment pieces. And equally, it's as simple as also engaging the full stakeholder ecosystem on setting targets and things like this and coming together and understanding what their role is within that. So I think that framework is really helpful. And I know it only came out at the end of last year, but people are really sort of engaging, understanding and taking that on board and seeing that as something that is actionable rather than sort of some theory to take forward. So I think that's super positive.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really fascinating. And look, I mean, my sort of brain's sort of beginning to sort of fry a bit from all these different things. But like, if we kind of move on to where things, you know, how we get there, I just want to throw a few things at you that we've discussed in different places to try and help make sure they get embedded into this conversation. So one, I guess, is at the round table you participated in, there was a discussion about whether the term smart ready was commonly agreed. And the sort of follow-up to that is, to those people who think it is, was, well, how come there's about 5 different diagrams that I can see where smart ready is different in different places in the sequence if everyone has some common agreement about that term? You know, sometimes it's at the very first stage, sometimes it's stage 2, sometimes it's stage 4 or whatever. So, but I am also starting to see that with road to net zero roadmaps, where everyone has their own proprietary roadmap of how we get there. And I wonder whether those things serve to confuse more than they edify by not showing consistency across everyone's vision on how, particularly where technology is applied or where data is being used. So that's one observation. But, could part of getting there be about some kind of agreement or consolidation of what a roadmap might look like? There's also a second point, I guess, that you've raised, because you've mentioned both the Better Buildings Partnership and the UK Green Building Council having kind of approaches. I mean, could both of those feed into some sort of, I guess, make specification easier for those people who might be trying, well, from a company who might give you a specification and one that your platform may have to conform to? Could those help kind of create some agreement about how specification might work more straightforwardly? And I guess the third one is something that Anna mentioned in the pre-call, which I thought was actually quite fascinating, really. That is, if you're talking about kind of differences between landlords and occupiers or landlords and tenants, then the tenants may have their own kind of ESG commitments that they have made, and therefore I think you talked about some of the sort of mechanical engineering type design consultants helping them create sort of bespoke kind of metrics from all the different leads, GRESPs, resets, neighbors, or whatever, and whatever ESG targets and commitments and goals they have. I mean, that sounded super clever, really, because of course you're a company, you put out into the ether, that, or out into the public domain, that you're going to be reaching such and such by when and doing this and what. Yet your portfolios may be different, the building types might be different, so there's some sort of bespokeness. I just wonder whether that bespokeness can align with some sort of agreement about specification or whatever. So sorry for kind of jumping in and giving my tuppence worth, but those are the three interesting areas about how we might be able to get there. Right, you may have some other ones, but maybe that's a starting point. I think I can't remember whose turn it is. Why don't we go with Anna?
Right.
Hey,
A for Anna. There we go. Well, I guess I'll touch on, I guess the point that you had referenced, I had made about some of these bespoke set of standards, if you will, that clients are coming in with. So I think my point around that was we had discussed, all the various rating systems that are out there right now to deem your space sustainable, right? You have WELL, you have BREEAM, you have Neighbors, LEED. Depending on what part of the world you're in, your country might have its own specific standard. So, and what I was saying when we spoke about this, Justin, is that we are absolutely still seeing those standards. They still come in pretty much with every tender. You're going to have a BREEAM. WELL is incredibly common now. We often have a BREEAM WELL dual concurrent standard going on. But what we're seeing a lot more of now, and I'm not saying every client's coming in with these, but we've seen a huge uptick of these, is where clients will know that they have to do these rating systems like BREEAM and WELL, perhaps as a requirement of their tenancy, or perhaps because it was put in place from their company a few years ago. But now that people are taking net zero carbon a bit more seriously, and I'm going to even say the S in ESG, the social impact portion of ESG, they are coming up with their own bespoke frameworks of KPIs around what success in this space means specifically to their company, which I think is a great idea, because rating systems are great. I think they have their own space and they perform their own function. But I think people really do end up doing a lot of things that perhaps they wouldn't really do unless they were just going for that certification, things that might not totally make sense for their company, or for the direction of travel where they're headed. So we're seeing a lot more bespoke frameworks around around ESG, and I think it is really helping um, just give a very clear direction to where companies want to be headed. It's forcing them to sit down, perhaps with a consultant, like you mentioned, Justin, to help define what that means to them. I'm not saying they all knew what they wanted right from the get-go, but we are seeing a lot of these bespoke frameworks come in that have been made in partnership with a consultancy to help drive the conversation within their company to really get out of them what they actually want so that they're going into this project with a very clear idea of what a successful outcome means for them and what a more long lasting outcome, I will say, rather than just a tick box certification. So I think if anything, those have some really deep meaning beyond the rating systems, if you will.
Is that as true for retrofit and fit out as it is for new build?
Yeah, we're seeing it across the range. I think people um, even more so in retrofits. I think people are really proud to be retrofitting a space. I'm not saying that new spaces aren't fantastic too. They're both fantastic in their own ways, but we do have clients that come in that perhaps have been in a space for ages and that's their home and they're really proud to stay there, but they know that it needs a bit of bit of lifeblood blasted into it, um, or in order to make sure that the asset doesn't get stranded, they're going to do what they can within reason to hold on to that asset, and that's become a really important driver for them. So yeah, I think it will span new build and retrofit.
And Katie, any of those three I threw at you, relevant you want to speak about, or is there some other area that you think might be a better focus for trying to get things to be nudged along?
No, I think it's, that to Anna's point, I think the drivers behind ESG more broadly, so jumping out of just the net zero piece, are different for every stakeholder and they're different for every building, the same as every building in terms of its potential when it comes to ESG, its transition from a net zero perspective is completely different. So I think also we have to look beyond, I guess, ratings and regulations providing all the answers. What they've been really good at is giving us a direction. They've been putting it front of mind, and we're seeing it across the E, the S, the G. But equally, there's a need for divergence in terms of being representative of the character of the building, the character of the people in it, the character of the community around it. And I think with that as well, we've all become more knowledgeable on ESG. And I think that's where you're seeing sort of these more bespoke frameworks coming into place. People are engaging with their workforces, understanding what really matters, and actually understanding that pattern is really what informs what the building should be doing, what its ESG journey is doing. So I think coming back to this sort of, the Venn diagram of all the stakeholders, it's really important that comes together. We've talked about it a lot in the industry in terms of it not coming together means that decarbonisation slows down. Everything slows down if we don't bring everybody together. And I think equally, when you talk to the fact of sort of regulation, the UK GBC, Better Buildings Partnership, all of these bodies do come together. And I think the standards that you'll see, particularly the net zero building standard, will be a huge accelerator in terms of a standard around what needs to be standardized. I think we have to also be aware that not everything is going to be standardized in this journey. We need to have a degree of creative license, and that's important, particularly when we start to look into the S side of things. And so, yeah, so I think that's sort of where I am from my perspective. As I say, ESG and the drivers are so different from anybody and everybody. And I think, as I say, we can't standardize everything, which might be what we're looking to do. The same in terms of the argument around looking for perfect data sets, looking for perfect ESG valuation metrics, looking for perfect regulation. It doesn't exist because we're all learning as we go and everything is changing alongside that. So we've got to be in a position where we're using tech to be dynamic, to equip us, for example, with the data, the insights to make decisions and to try new things. But we've still also got to be bold, we've got to be brave, and we've got to do things differently. And as I say, that will look different for every building, every community, every occupier. So
I mean, it's interesting because when on the round table there was, talk about how the smart building space is still very siloed, and there are all these different groups looking at different aspects, and some of those groups can be trade bodies, some could be rating bodies, but smart is something that is horizontal, and and cuts across all those different trade associations. And I mean, I've got a spreadsheet and it's probably got over 200 different groups who could be vaguely, some very much and some on the periphery of that. And and that's by no means comprehensive, that list. So but I would say the same is true about ESG and drive towards net zero. And I just wonder, from someone who's like coming at this from a prop tech perspective, do you really see them as being those people providing standards or whatever on top of the technology side as much as they might be on the physical side, in terms of the understanding? Because when I speak to technologists, they all go neighbors, 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 because they love the performance aspect of it, measurement, because that's what their platforms do. They're less kind of interested in some of those ones which are much more about the building as a whole than they are about those ones which focus on performance orientated measurement. So I just wonder, all these groups you talk about and standards, not to discredit them at all, but are they necessarily focused on it from a technology perspective enough?
I would argue yes. I think that's also always changing. I think RICS, has its technology partner network. UKGBC has a prop tech arm. So does Better Buildings Partnership. Tech is sort of infused through that. I think where the industry has changed is terms of tech is the how, right? Tech is there to enable performance. It's there to enable the transition. It's there to enable insights faster and with more accuracy than ever before. It's not there to necessarily do the work for us, but I think it's also being iterative, right? If we look at what we do at Resustain, we actually undertake remote control of the building where it's appropriate. So we are able to do that remotely, and we elevate the facilities manager to be doing other things. And I think that's where we're getting to. Tech is there, as I say, to do the how. It's there to elevate the workforce in terms of the future of the FM role, the PM role, and that's probably a different conversation in itself. And I think tech is quite clear on that. I think where we need to get better at is this interoperability. You talk of a sort of a smart building stack. I think different technologies are leaning into different parts of what's smart, what's a net zero compliant building, and where we need to get better is not expecting the technologies out there to stretch into loads of different fields. We've got tech that is excellent in the realms of what it's there to do. It needs to come together, and we need to enable it to work together and share data up and down in order to be successful. So as I say, I think at times, and having seen it in prop tech companies, you sort of get a client request that, wouldn't it be nice if you sort of stretched over here and did this for us, right? That there's probably a solution for that. And we need to get better at being like, let's look at a stack of solutions that comes together really well. And actually that's our smart stack for ESG success. So yeah, that's sort of where I am. But I think the industry's becoming more progressive around tech, the role of tech. But if you look at it on the surface, we can get to net zero without technology, but we won't get there fast enough, and we won't get there with the scale and the pace needed in terms of those 2050 targets without it.
Anna, anything you'd like to add on that topic, or anything else that you can see, even if that's just sort of low-hanging fruit that there might be that people could be doing to, kind of start reducing emissions?
Gosh, I feel like I'm just swinging back to what I originally said. I think I totally agree with Katie. I think the tech is there as a tool to help us along, but it's not the panacea I think that people think it is, unless it's getting used in a meaningful way. And that goes back to my point around knowing how your building is used. It's kind of like data in, data out, right? The tech and the data and the usefulness of it is the outcome. The output of it is only going to be as good as what you can get into it. And if you're not getting meaningful data at the onset, and then actually using it to help inform design decisions or flexibility in your space in terms of how it will be used and changes that need to be made, um, then it's really just a bolt on, isn't it? It can be used incredibly meaningful in incredibly meaningful way if people take the time and sit down and kind of use it for its intended purpose. I don't want to get in the whole can of worms of what the definition of a smart building is, but Justin, I know you started a really interesting conversation on LinkedIn about the REBA smart buildings overlay. And I mean, I think one thing you will see about all of these frameworks, I think one of the common denominators is they all say everyone needs to get together and start this process very early.
Yeah.
Thankfully, they can all agree on that, which is so crucial. You can't bolt on some of this stuff at REBA stage 5 or at the end of REBA stage 4. It just is. It's just not appropriate for its intended use, and it does become a pretty unuseful tool and a bit of a bolt-on. So start early, whatever framework that you decide on that makes you the most comfortable. Do it early and make it an integrative process, getting everyone involved, especially the facilities management team. I can't stress enough how late people leave getting facilities management on board. And Katie, you must work with facilities management teams all the time, getting them on board early so that on first day of business, they're not saying, yep, we need to change that, we need to change that, we need to change that. That will have all been designed in already. And they will be, them along with the occupiers of the buildings will have a building that makes sense for them.
Yeah, I think I know a number of integrators who are trying to encourage their staff to all have early engagement tattooed on their
It's true though.
corporate logo and set clear goals, I think was the other one. But the look,
it sounds basic, but it honestly it could be so helpful, and you'll be surprised how often it doesn't happen.
Katie, is there anything you would like to add to that?
No, I think it's, I think all too often you see, and this is just an observation, is that 25 technologies are thrown into a building, and yeah, isn't that great? I think a lot of it is, from what we do, there's so much equipment and opportunity to progress a building, to enhance the ESG side of things without throwing loads of technology into the mix. You've got to have a very thoughtful approach to technology. What is the objective? Why are you considering it? Will it deliver the impact? And you've got to have a strategy around it. I know strategy is banded around a lot, but you've got to have a reason, and you've got to be able to monitor the performance of that so that I'm loving the cat there.
It's my mom's cat.
I've had to lock my door because my cat's always coming in the middle of the podcast and going on the keyboard, and
I'm swatting it away the entire time. I don't know if you've seen me.
You've done it very stealthily. I love that it just wants to be part of the conversation.
Huge thank you both. We haven't talked about experience much, but maybe that's one for the next one. But I'm really grateful for your time, and that's been hugely interesting. So thanks, Anna. Thanks, Katie. Look forward to seeing you both soon.
Thank you.